under its own success. Because the size and complexity of the code and the products was exploding with the growth of the company. And even though Google tried to hire the best and provide a supportive environment, the development operation was getting so big it was starting to break down. No project was a better example of this than the Google Web Server, the program running the google.com web page, and we call it GWIS for short. I wasn't a member of this team, but I was close to its tech lead and some other folks, as we'll see. In 2004, this was not a glamorous assignment. It was a dumping ground. There were all these other teams creating search features that they wanted to see on the homepage to show grandma. But imagine if you break google.com or you let it become broken, all those thousands of queries per second become thousands of broken promises when search results are bad or they're really slow, and you're losing not only revenue but trust. So when Bart Metarata became tech lead of the GWIS team, he thought that automated testing would go a long way to fixing these problems with complexity and fragility, so the team took a hard line. No more changes would be accepted if they didn't have tests. And so they set up a continuous build, kept it passing religiously. They monitored their coverage to make sure it went up over time. They had a policy and style guides. They insisted that not only the team members, but that everybody outside the team contributing to GWIS followed those rules. And despite the initial unpopularity of this policy, the GWIS team held firm and eventually turned a corner. They became one of the most productive teams in the company, integrating a huge number of changes from teams from different places while maintaining a very rapid release schedule. And when new members joined the team, they could be productive really quickly. They could do real work because they had high test coverage and good code health. So ultimately, this radical policy enabled the google.com homepage to expand its capabilities and thrive in an amazingly fast-moving and competitive technology landscape. So GWIS obviously was a model of automated testing effectiveness, just like I was at my old company. But it was still a relatively small team in a large and growing company. And given all the other forces and worldviews and personalities at Google, plus the fact that we couldn't prove that testing was worth the investment using data, the GWIS message was getting drowned out by Google's standard narrative. So we had to find a way to amplify that message and to build a bridge across the chasm. So this chasm model comes from a book called Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore. It's Geoffrey with a G. I think he must be British. And it basically describes how different types of people adopt technology or adopt change differently. So over here on the left, we have innovators and early adopters. These are the like-minded seekers that I call instigators. They're the ones that are always trying new things and experimenting. But the downside is that all this churn, all this energy, around changes can be very disruptive for the rest of the company. But over here, immediately across the chasm, we have our friends in the early majority, and they're very open to change, but they need something. They're not the experts, right? They need something polished that they can understand and they can use. So they're kind of like a fad filter. They don't let every new idea come through, just the ones that are, that really have potential and have really been polished. The late majority isn't so eager for change, but they're sort of like the anchor to all this. Like once they see something working for the rest of the company, they'll make it part of the standard procedure. And the laggards, they're interesting. They're the loud ones. They're the ones that say, that's a stupid idea, it'll never work. They provide the most direct challenge to the instigators. But the thing is, sometimes that direct challenge can inspire the instigators to find common ground that nobody expected and produce solutions that are much more durable than they would have produced on their own. So getting the right messaging to the right people in the right order is important. And crossing this chasm here between the instigators and the early majority is the most critical part to making sure an initiative succeeds. But what I've added here, this little bar, is what I call the rainbow of death. So this isn't my idea, the actual model. I stole it from another ex-Googler friend of mine named Albert Wong, and he approved of my stealing it, which makes it not stealing, really. But he also approved of me changing the name. He called it Framework for Helping, and I thought, no, we need something a little weirder than that, so this is what I came up with. Believe it or not, though, this will make sense by the time we get to the end. I didn't realize it till 2 years after I started using this name, but it's funny how the mind works sometimes. So the idea is these are the steps that the instigators have to take to make that connection with the early majority to cross the chasm. So the intervene step is where the instigators with the necessary expertise write tools and they solve critical issues that nobody else can yet. Validate is the step where instigators give the early majority a way to measure their progress, both so they can see progress and to inspire them to continue. Inform, that's where the instigators teach the early majority how to do the right thing the right way. And inspire is where the instigators give the moral support and inspiration to keep doing it. Mentor is where you're building relationships and the instigators can directly coach people that are going through the learning process. And then finally, once you've reached empowerment, the instigators have given the knowledge and power of how to do the right thing to the early majority so that they can continue to do it under their own power. They've become the experts themselves at that point. So this seems pretty linear. We can see a progression from dependency on the experts to independence to having your own capability. But this doesn't have to happen. And in fact, as we'll see, it didn't happen in order. We started filling parts of this rainbow in using the tools and the ideas that we had at the time. And then over time, well, we didn't know it at the time. Like 5 years later, I'm looking at this and going, oh, this is how it worked. But we can see through this model how when we're focusing in one area, we can begin to see where we need to start focusing in another. And so it's up to the instigators to build this bridge across the chasm. And the testing instigators at Google, despite the fact we had some challenges working against us that we'll see, we did have a few advantages. We had access to information and tools to help discover it. We were empowered to develop and promote a vision, and we had the freedom to combine forces with other like-minded people to pursue a goal. So shortly before I joined in 2005, Bart joined forces with Nick Lasecki to form the testing grouplet. And so grouplets are basically these volunteer teams that use their 20% time, which you may be familiar with. That's the policy that allows people to work basically a day a week on something that isn't their main project. So these volunteers will use that time to form a team to address a problem that affects the whole company. And so eventually I did become one of the leads after Bart and Nick. So we had very little money and no authority, but we did have a lot of freedom to try lots of crazy creative things to tackle some of these challenges facing automated testing adoption, using the GWIS experience as a model. So this is the last abstract model before I get to the real details, but to frame it one more time in an abstract way, we'll use Kurt Lewin's model of theory of social change to kind of explain the behavior change process. There's the unfreezing phase, which is where people have to unlearn their existing habits. The change phase, where they learn the new ones. And the refreezing phase, where it becomes standard procedure, becomes like a reflex. And there are forces that are compelling this change and forces restraining it. And so we believed that Google developers were getting more and more frozen in an unsustainable pattern, and we thought automated testing was necessary to break it. However, at the same time, there was a whole array of restraining forces that were pushing against automated testing adoption. Most people then had no experience with automated testing outside of how slow it was given the tools of the time. And they were under constant delivery pressure while feeling intimidated by many of their peers. I mean, I don't know how they managed to not fire me until I quit after 6 years. You'd think Google will be smarter than that, but they never figured that out, in case you're wondering what I'm talking about here. But the point being, who could blame people for not testing or not trying to test when they couldn't afford the time to learn? So there's an economic term called temporal discounting, where let's say you know nothing about testing, and somebody says, hey, you could push your feature right now and hope for the best, or you could figure out how to do this testing thing and maybe avoid a problem that may or may not happen. Well, usually people will just ship and hope for the best. So combined with the fact that the tools were just not keeping up with the load, things were getting very slow, people couldn't get in that state of creative flow while programming, combined with the immediate pain of trying to do anything, period, building your code, let alone testing it, and not getting that feedback that you need, trying to pursue a distant goal that, had an unclear benefit. All of this made the right thing way harder than it needed to be. So arguing against these excuses, that my code's too hard to test, or I just don't have time, that would have been counterproductive, because these were symptoms of some real problems that we needed to solve, and the standard narrative that produced them wouldn't produce the solution. So we started experimenting with a bunch of ideas to start chipping away at the problems, and we started with what we knew. So we worked really closely with Eng.edu. This was a training organization inside the company, and we would produce training materials called code labs, which you could think of as like kata, just exercises on the wiki. We worked on a Noogler lecture, so that means new Googler. Yeah, we called them that. We gave them little funny hats with the propeller and everything. So we worked with our training organization to give an introductory lecture, followed by an in-person lab. And they also helped us organize tech talks. We'd give talks, we'd invite people from outside to give talks, we'd give away books. We also started updating the language. We introduced the idea of small, medium, and large tests, which, as you can tell, it just means unit test, integration test, system test. But we felt we had to do this because at the time inside Google, all these smart people came up with this terminology where a unit test was any test that ran in less than 5 minutes. Not seconds. Minutes. Anything that ran longer than 5 minutes was a regression test. So this was the best that MIT and Stanford grads could come up with at the time. So we thought we could do a little better. And when we introduced this new terminology, we could be a bit more rigorous. It didn't have the baggage of the past. We could say what a small test was and what a medium test was and what they were good for. And then finally, we worked with our internal tools teams to actually work on the problem of the tools getting too slow, of the tools not being able to keep up with the growth of the company. And this helped reduce the friction that created the I don't have time to test excuse. So here we can see early on how these different pieces started fitting into the rainbow. And what you'll notice is there's a big emphasis on inform, because the natural inclination is to think, oh, people just don't know, if we just give them the information, they'll start doing the right thing. But, as I've been reminded of in, my own homeland, knowledge and facts aren't always sufficient to change people's perspective and behavior. So we had to try a little harder than that. But still, going through all these exercises with language and terminology and procedures, it helped us define our own, our own set of concepts. It helped us articulate our message that we were trying to promote to the rest of the company. But we were getting frustrated, right? Like we were doing all this stuff, the lectures, the labs, the talks, the books that were collecting dust on people's desks. So in early 2006, we were planning quarterly goals, and we were just like desperate for ideas. Like, how do we get people to pay attention? How do we get people to actually learn this stuff and use it? And so after we basically got completely silly, we threw out an idea that ended up being one of the best ones we ever had, and that is testing on the toilet, which hopefully you're familiar with these days at Schibsted. And this was 2006. They're still publishing an episode a week. And the nice feature of this is that just one piece of knowledge every week that people could absorb over time made a huge difference in raising the degree of knowledge and sophistication around testing throughout the company. And people would take these concepts and tools that they learned about in their free time, and they'd use it on their own code. And eventually, the episodes became supplements to the official style guides. People would say, oh, I did this because I learned about it in this episode. Or during a code review, somebody would say, I think you should try this that I just learned about a few minutes ago in the bathroom. So it became a very valuable information resource. We began to recognize that there were a lot of teams that were like, yeah, that's cool, but how do we get started? We don't know where to begin. So that's where we came up with the Test Certified program. So it's designed to do two things. One, to hack the culture. It gave people something to measure because they love data at Google. But it also overcame that psychological obstacle, like, wow, this is impossible. I don't know where to start. So we made it easy. We gave them 3 levels of increasing complexity, and it was just what a lot of people needed. And it was based, of course, on the GWIS model. We also provided these volunteer mentors as well, so they wouldn't be trying to do this on their own. They'd have somebody to kind of coach them through it, and when they got to a certain point, they would validate their progress and say, yes, you are now test certified level 1, level 2. But eventually we needed more. There were some bigger teams with bigger problems that needed more than part-time help. So we made a pitch to the executives and created a team called the Test Mercenaries, sort of internal consultants that would spend months at a time working with the team on their code, applying all these tools and concepts, and using Test Certified as both a guide and as a goal for the engagement. And the other nice feature is that we would use all the new tools that the internal tools teams were producing on some of the hardest, biggest problems in the company and provide that feedback directly to them. So we could see more of this rainbow coming together. And Test Certified, of course, it also informs and inspires and provides mentorship, but it was the validation function that I think was the most crucial. People could really see progress, they could feel progress, and they were encouraged to make more. And we also sweetened the deal with these little build orbs. So, in the beginning, they were like these little glass, glowy things that people could sit on their desks. And it was funny. People really developed empathy for these inanimate objects. When the orb was red, that was sad. They wanted the orb to be happy. So they would do what they could to make it green and happy again. They wanted to make the orb green again. It was also fun for a lot of the grouplet members because then there were variations. You can't just have one orb. What if we had this kind of orb, that kind of orb? And in New York, it was pretty great. I spent most of my time in New York, actually. And we had these Statue of Liberty models with an Arduino in the bottom, I think, and then they wired a light up to the torch. So the torch would be the green or red light. So we also started organizing these things. There was sort of a tradition inside Google called Fix-Its, which hopefully maybe this is starting to become familiar at Schibsted as well, because we're having one next week, which I'll get to. But the idea is they were just volunteer organized. They weren't mandated by any executives. We just did our best to persuade as many people as we could to spend one day doing something important but not urgent. And it wasn't always testing, but testing was a great thing. You could take a day to write tests that you needed, to fix tests that were failing or flaky. You could become part of the Test Certified program and get credit for that. And this type of event, this urgency that was created around having a big day, it created a whole bunch of attention and I guess a whole bunch of new knowledge being generated and experience and relationships. It basically took everything up to a new plateau, both for the participants and the organizers. So, after about 2 years, we had started to figure things out. We were really rolling, but the problem was we were also drifting apart. So the grouplet, the test certified program, the test mercenaries, and testing on the toilet, they kind of became their own entities. And I started feeling like I was the only common link through all of them. And so I started asking my friends, like, hey, we need a strategy. We got to come up with something to get us all back, aligned on the same path. And we came up with getting all projects to test certified level 3 within a couple of years. And the important thing was we actually didn't care if everybody was in test certified or not. We just wanted to reach a tipping point so that all the teams eventually functioned as if they were practicing at test certified level 3. So notice here that empower remains a little bit light. So the tooling innovations that we were, giving feedback, that we were driving with feedback to the tools teams, they weren't really being used by that many people yet. So that was limiting the impact of the knowledge we were sharing. We needed a way to get these tools adopted by the rest of the company. And it turned out fix-its were pretty great for that. So we had this revolution fix-it, we called it, because I'm a Beatle maniac. You'll see a few Beatles references here and there. And this was the day that most of the company began to adopt the cloud-based build tools that maybe you've read about now, things that did the build steps and the test execution in the cloud. The Blaze build tool, which is now open sourced, is Bazel. That was pushed out during the revolution. And the main cost that teams had to pay to use the new tools, in fact, we weren't even asking them to write tests this time. We were just saying, adopt the new tools. It'll make everything faster. And we did have the data that proved that. And people were so happy. They're like, tell us what to do. We'll do anything if you just make anything faster. We're like, okay, well, clean up your dependencies and make sure all your build artifacts are in version control. Because the pain was so severe for so long, people had all these little hacks and things, and they would have this expensive build artifact here and this expensive build artifact there. So we got them to put them all back into source control. And wouldn't you know, when they put everything back into source control, they cleaned up their dependencies, suddenly everything was faster. And you know what you can do when everything's faster? You can start learning how to test. So not everybody actually participated in the revolution, but everybody was impacted by it. You could hear teams talking in like the days and weeks afterwards about, yeah, this week we're going to revolutionize our build. Because the day of the revolution, it looked like, wow, okay, not that many people were doing stuff. But they all heard about it was the important thing. And very quickly, team after team after team started moving to the new tools. And so that was pretty great, but I think something that happened later that year indirectly demonstrated the testing grouplet impact as well. So I'm not saying the testing grouplet is responsible for saving Google during the financial crisis, at least not single-handedly. What I can say is that at that time, the company made a decision to let go a lot of its contract employees, many of whom were manual testers and actually the test mercenaries. But what didn't happen was a flood of bugs appearing. There wasn't a quality crisis. There wasn't a slowdown in the development operation. Somehow, people by that point knew what the right thing to do was and had the power to do it. So we had made the right thing easy enough. So after 3.5 years of saturating the culture, we had the support and the momentum that we needed to finish the bridge across the chasm. But it still took another 1.5 years. So we rolled out the test automation platform during the TAP Fix-It in March 2010. And it was built upon these revolutionized tools. It was centralized. All the projects could put their continuous builds on TAP and have the reports integrated with one another. And so at the time when TAP first rolled out, I think TAP was a little too successful. They had to actually throttle it a little bit over time. But when it first came out, let's say you're a build cop. You see your build break. You're like, oh no, I have to investigate. You look at the TAP page, it shows you exactly what change broke your build because it could figure out that relationship. It could walk the dependency graph. And so you look at the code review for that change and see that, oh, a dozen other people already jumped on this and the change has either been rolled back or fixed. So by the time you look up again, your build's passing. That was amazing. I mean, contrast that with where everybody had their own build machine. They would batch all these changes in a single run. If something broke, you had to figure out what it was. No, this was a tremendous amount of power that we acquired overnight. Well, overnight after 5 years. So after 5 years of breaking from the standard narrative, with success uncertain for most of it, we succeeded in making automated testing an indispensable practice of the Google development culture. So the question is, what did things look like 5 years later? So Rachel Potvin from the tools team, she gave a talk at the At Scale conference in 2015, and she included some pretty astonishing numbers. And remember, 2015, that's 2 years ago. Who knows what they are right now? I haven't looked it up. But while her talk kind of goes through a number of different tools that comprise this ecosystem, she makes a point of saying specifically, TAP is our automated test infrastructure without which this model would completely fall apart. So, this is the part of the talk where if I'm giving it to a general audience, I start trying to rally them, I start trying to shake them to action, take these ideas, don't sit still, be brave, be the change you want to see in the world. But what's really cool about having been here at Schibsted for almost 2 months and getting to know people and traveling and seeing what's happening and making things happen, I can report to you as I keep talking while I stall for time. Whoa, that's exactly the opposite of what I wanted to have happen. What I can report to you is how this rainbow is already starting to come together at Schibsted. And I just need to switch my notes as well. I mean, I've given this talk enough times, I practically know it by heart, but I still need a little bit of a safety net. I think there's a parallel with automated testing in there somewhere. So, hopefully, what you're starting to ask, I've built the suspense. All right, well, what do we do at Schibsted? What's going on? What can I do? Well, in terms of specifics, I can't really tell you. I've only been here a couple months. I'm not, actually doing development work. I'm going to be leaving at the end of the month. But, like I said, I've been getting to know a few of your colleagues, and I think they've got some pretty good ideas. So, let me introduce to you some of the instigators that we've begun to collect throughout Schibsted offices. Some of these names may be a little familiar to you. And so thanks to these people, we've got a rainbow of death right here already underway, and we're going to talk about what it looks like. So we do have a Schibsted test certified program. And by the way, I don't presume that I can just walk into a company and say, let's do everything Google did. So this was already happening before I came on board. So I can't take credit for this one. But just like at Google, the idea is to create a series of levels to help people overcome the obstacles to starting to do a better job testing. Level 1 is about measurement, seeing what your coverage is, seeing what your mix of unit integration system tests is, and so forth. Second is about policy, getting your team to buy in to the commitment to do more testing and setting some really easy goals at first. You can even say, hey, let's get to 10% coverage this quarter. It's better than 0 if that's where you're starting from. And so level 3, once you've got that measurement, that visibility, you've got some buy-in, and you've got some early success, you've got a foundation to start reaching for some higher level goals in the long term. And of course, there are mentors that can help you along the way. And the thing I also want to point out is that it's not just for teams that need help. We also want to use this program to highlight the teams that are already doing well, to basically, put them on a pedestal so people can see who's doing what, how are they doing it, and to also recruit some of these teams as mentors to other teams to spread knowledge and practices throughout Schibsted. This should also look familiar by now. And again, I didn't say you should do testing on the toilet. By the time I arrived, they were already planning to do so. Of course, I've helped a little bit, but it's going to keep going. It's going to start becoming a weekly publication. We're starting to get more episodes, but we can always use more. Domains, whether it's back-end, front-end, iOS, Android, more languages, whether it's Java or Go or JavaScript. Anybody can contribute. You don't have to be an expert on all things testing. If you just have one little thing that you can write about for one sheet of paper, we would love to have your contribution. Now, this was something that I started lobbying for, creating a Schibsted testing grouplet. And Tony here is one of the leads, along with Nick in London, Nick Infante. And the idea is testing on the toilet and test certified are not things that just one team in Barcelona can do by themselves. They really need a community across the company in order to thrive. So we're always looking for new members, people who, whether they're experts or whether they want to learn more, but they just want to help promote, good practices throughout their teams and their office. We're looking for people to connect across Schibsted to be part of this movement. We're also talking to DevRel, which I'm sure many of you already know and love. They have a mission to raise awareness of good practices throughout the company, providing access to tools and information, educating people on how to apply them, and building communities on top of that foundation. Not just testing, but you can imagine a security community or a monitoring community, or maybe a microservices community, or maybe everything is a microservices community these days, but you might still have people that want to do that. And the developer console will, of course, be their flagship product that puts all this information in one accessible place so everybody can discover it. And the really cool idea is that once you have this platform and this visibility and this education, you can have a Schibsted-wide maturity model, not just about testing, but about these other concerns, such as monitoring and security. And something I don't have a slide for right now, Tony and I were just in Oslo, and we met, I'm going to get her name wrong, Sissel Sunsba. I'm really sorry to Norwegians. But she's now, I guess, the head of global learning and development. She's gotten approval for a program to start creating a real learning organization at Schibsted, and she is interested in throwing whatever weight she can behind the grouplet and all the other things that we're trying to do. So it's not about Schibsted in Norway giving orders to everybody else. It's not about Innsprod in Barcelona giving orders. It's about supporting a community that finds its own answers, but finds it together. Then finally, bam! Next week on Thursday, June 22nd, we're going to have a Fix-It, and Tony's running it, but not by himself. And he can use more and more help. But just like at Google, we're going to try and create a time for people to just take a day or part of a day to write tests, fix tests, give a talk about tests, join Test Certified. There's a whole list of things people can do. And there's going to be talks streamed across offices on top of being locally focused. It's going to be fun. Hopefully we'll have some prizes to give out. I know, so I've got Luis to take on the responsibility of looking into these prizes and fun things, and he's getting kind of excited about it too. So we're hoping everybody here, everybody listening, does something on that day. And even better, if you can reach out to Tony and let him know that you're willing to make it local. So again, this isn't one centralized event. This happens to be a whole bunch of local events happening at the same time. That's the dream. And so I'll bring it to a close with this. I actually have more slides, but I decided this is actually a pretty good stopping point. But you can see the parallels already to what we put together at Google over 5 years. And now we've already got a whole bunch of it coming together already at Schibsted. And now that we have this lens, this model that helps us see where we're doing well and where we need more work, hopefully that can make it easy for the community to figure out how to fill in the rest of these pieces. So that is the conclusion of my first talk. And this afternoon, Tony will be talking more shop about the actual tools that IngeProd is developing and distributing and stealing to make it easy for everybody at Schibsted to do the right thing, to make it easier to do the right thing. So thank you for talk one. We're going to take, I guess, maybe, would you suggest 5 or 10 minutes? And we'll come back for the next one. Thank you. Oh, question. Oh, yeah. If there are any questions, feel free if you want to do it on camera, or talk to me in the break. Sure.
Yeah. I have one question. You show on a slide in which you say something about Google Stats. And
about Google. Oh, the stats.
The stats of the commits. I saw that there was 30,000 commits did by automated stuff, and the half are doing by humans.
Right.
What kind of commits are doing the machines?
So before I give an answer, I'll just say if you want all the details, you can find Rachel's talk, and it's linked from my slides. Yeah, I didn't show you the rainbow of death. Let me put that link up real quick, just so you have it. My contact information. Oh. Yes, we have all these good and interesting slides down here. There we go. So this is the link from my blog where I have the original talk, and we can share the Schibsted version too. But if you go to that link, I have a whole bunch of notes and a whole bunch of links and footnotes, and so you can find a whole bunch of information there. So, I can't remember if there's more tools than this, but the number one tool that started becoming responsible for a lot of those changes is a tool called, in fact, I know they have more, but I forgot what it's called. But the big tool was Rosie. Rosie, it was named after, I don't know if you know the cartoon, The Jetsons, in the future, and they have a robotic maid named Rosie. That's where the name came from. And the idea was, if you have to make a sweeping change across the whole code base, because remember we had one repository. So rather than try and coordinate, everybody changing things, like having a fix-it to change something, or rather than just doing it by force and hoping nothing really gets too broken, what you could do is you can create one big change across the whole code base and have Rosie start cutting it up. So we had another concept in our code called owners, where basically you could identify this part of the code belongs to these people, this part of the code belongs to these people. And the point wasn't that nobody else could see the code. The point was they were the people who knew it the best and were responsible for keeping it in shape. So Rosie would figure out how to cut up, how to partition one big change into smaller changes for each set of owners, and then send those out for review. And so I guess it got a little too popular. So what would happen is if somebody reviewed an automated change and after somebody approved an automated change, Rosie would just submit it. So people started using Rosie for everything, I guess. And I think they've got more things on top of that, but that was the model that I was familiar with. Yeah. In case you're worried, I don't think that they're building Skynet. I don't think they're putting programmers out of a job yet. It'd be funny if programmers become the new coal miners, if I dare say it one day, but it's possible. Take nothing for granted. Any other questions before break? Okay, so if got questions during break, feel free. So we'll start